welcome to the stage, Celia and Michael.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome back.
Good afternoon. How's everybody? Excellent. We're excited to be here. I think we got a good idea of the crowd this morning based on who's interior designers, architects, lighting designers.
Yes, sir.
Let's see a show of hands for New Yorkers. Woo! Awesome.
Right. We're both from New York, Manhattan, Bedford. Anyone from Westchester? No, New York is good.
Good. So over the next 23 minutes, exactly as the timer tells us, we're going to explore a little bit about design and design for well-being. And everyone's definition of well-being is very different. And so we thought by starting this conversation, just asking each other, what does well-being mean to you, Michael?
Yeah. So everyone does have their own definition, but when I try to explain my viewpoint on wellness, it's really about not just the absence of disease, but it's elevating our physiological, mental, and some may add spiritual health. It's more of a holistic paradigm that we have to look at, not just one dimension. So when we talk about, we're here as a design build community, so when we talk about the built environment, what are our homes? What kind of role is our home, our workplace playing in terms of elevating our physiological, mental, spiritual health? And so these are questions that we're going to delve into today, and I hope you guys have a lot of questions, and obviously you're interested in the topic, so we're excited to be here.
And when I was thinking about, what's well-being, I'm trained as an architect and worked as a lighting designer. I think there's something really beautiful about well-being, which is it needs to provide a sense of ease, right? It should be a frictionless existence, whether it's in your home or your workplace. And the other thing that I think is really important about well-being is that it's a full sensorial experience, right? We're designing for all the senses, for sound, for scent, for touch. And as we begin to explore, how to design and build spaces of well-being, to keep those points in mind is really important. And, as we were prepping for this and talking about, how does the industry approach it, or even how does the world approach well-being? If you Google, what are the most important things for well-being, you get things like nutrition and friendship and stress-free environments. Funny enough, financial security is one of the things that comes up. But what doesn't come up in that top tier list of 5 or 6 things is the built environment in which we inhabit. And because we spend 90% of time in that built environment, I think that's the focus of today, is how we can use the spaces that we live in as, enclosures, as cocoons for ourselves, as places that make us look, feel better, and really improve that part of our lives. Michael has some amazing statistics and kind of information on the subject of well-being, which I'm going to turn over to him to talk about.
Thank you. I agree with you because I always on my feed, I'm following wellness trends, things that affect our holistic health. And how many of you guys, I think I mentioned it last year when I was here, how many of you seen the Netflix documentary Blue Zones? Put your hand up. Dan Buettner. It's a really great reflection of how people live and how it impacts their health span. So lifespan is how long we live, and health span is out of those years, how much of it are we living in a way free of disease, free of some sort of chronic illness. And so when we look at the blue zones, like you mentioned, they focus on nutrition. Really, the nutrition is mostly plant-based, Mediterranean diet, no processed foods. They have great relationships. The community is so strong, they support each other. They must sleep well, but there's really not a lot of mention of environmental. So when I see that, I was like, there's one component missing here. And there's a little quote that was just, that you've seen on the screen here earlier. That's a great reflection of the type of impact we as an industry can have as a design build. It's not just design build, it's design build, and technology, because we're at CEDIA, is part of that design. And I think more and more over time, we're going to start seeing implementation of the environment as a tool to elevate health and wellness.
And I think that's really well put. And we're here today because of Doug Weinstein and Carol in their wonderful magazine. In this issue that you should all have in your little goodie bags, there's an excellent article on decarbonization of space and of homes. And as we begin to talk about, what tools do we have at our disposal to design responsibly for the environment, but also for people, there's some really great info in there. But I'd like to just kind of summarize that article because for me, it took a complex topic and made it really bite-sized pieces. And it talks about decarbonization in 3 different ways. First is the direct emissions. There's also the indirect emissions, and then there's the indirect embodied emissions within the products of a home. So if we break those down, if you think about direct emissions, that's what's produced by burning natural gas, oil, fuel. So ways to design more responsibly include using solar panels, using geothermal heat pumps, things of that typology. If we then think about the indirect emissions, that's the world of electricity, which I think in CEDIA is a world that we inhabit greatly. And so if we can find ways to reduce electricity in a home, whether that's by implementing smart home systems or dimming systems, or using your motorized shades to lower block light out so that you can then level set your thermostats to reduce energy consumption. These are all tools that we have at our disposal. And then the indirect embodied emissions talks about, the materials that we use and choose to use in homes. And we're going to get a little bit more deep into this because Michael is, I'm going to compliment him right now, but very well versed in the world of sustainability and WELL certification, which we're going to go into a little bit more in detail afterwards. And this talks about choosing materials that have responsible sourcing, that have environmental product declarations. How they were built, how they were made, that the materials being used were carbon neutral. And so, that whole world of what's in the material itself is also equally important.
Yeah. So if you're going to get the latest edition when you go home today, but the previous edition really talks about the urgency to decarbonate and detoxify. So when we talk about, like what Cecilia mentions, decarbonization, it's really cleaning the outdoor environment because everything outdoor comes indoors. And then the detoxification aspect of a home is how do we reduce the toxic load and create an indoor environment that is a safe haven when we actually spend time. We spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping in our beds, right? So if you live to 90, 30 years are in your bed, in your bedroom, if you think about it, right? So the environmental quality, we call it IEQ, indoor environmental quality, is so vital for our long-term health. And so when we talk about that detoxification, it's really about creating that safe haven for people. And it's really up to the design build community. There's no one else who can accomplish that in a home, right? And with the integration community, you have the latest in technology to be able to monitor, put it into real terms, and automate things where the environment is always at the optimal levels for occupant health. So design build plus technology design is really, really what's required to create that environment, to create safe havens. And I just wanted to point out the importance. And when you read that article, it really stresses the importance of why we need to have a sense of urgency to do that.
And the good news is that we have a lot of the tools to do so here today, right? Just walk the floor up above, and there's so many great ideas and technologies out there to do it. I think oftentimes it can be overwhelming, and so if we can just kind of, bring it down to those basic points, it makes more sense, and it's more bite-sized and more tangible. And so we put out a few ideas of what it means to design responsibly and sustainably in homes. Any other ideas out in the audience of things that you've all been doing that have been successful, or ideas that you'd like to learn more about or further explore in this dialogue amongst us all? Yep, over there.
Connecting the indoor environment with the outdoor environment,
Yep.
especially here in Colorado, it's a really big deal.
Yeah.
It's huge.
People just love
Exactly, and the whole concept of biophilia, right? Making sure that there's nature embedded in our living spaces. And I think the connection from outdoor to indoor, it can be a visual connection, as you're suggesting, but it can also be, the extension of natural light within a space. And that can be done through having electric light that matches the color temperature, the intensity, and it's dynamic and it's changing throughout the course of the day. Other elements of biophilia might be having living plants in your home. It could also be finding patterns and textures in the plasters that you apply, right, that evoke that of the outside. And so I think that concept is super important. It's a whole category unto itself that's important in the world that we design in today.
That's really a great point, because we see a lot of research studies where technology is bad for our health, especially social media, kids. Mental health rates have declined considerably after 2012 when Twitter started coming in, Facebook, and Instagram. But on the flip side, the great thing about the CD Expo is we can see how technology can elevate the human condition, right? And so the studies show that when we are in nature, it reduces our cortisol levels, reduces our stress response, inflammatory response gets decreases. It's actually helping our mental health to create those indoor-outdoor spaces. So a really, really important factor in design. There's so many other things. Anybody else want to offer something?
Yeah.
Appreciate this super important topic. Can you talk about lighting design in the context of the circadian rhythm a little bit, and the importance of how the melatonins and the cortisols of the world impacts our emotions with the temperature of light, and really how you see that impact the vibe and the feel of the space?
So there's all these kind of experiential examples of how light can be used to kind of expand time, shorten time, make us feel different ways. There's a lot of science, as you mentioned, behind how sunlight affects the human body. I think what people are trying to do now is replicate that through electric light. And the good news is that there's so many tools out there, and a lot of them on view upstairs at the expo. And there's a few things at play. I think there's always the color temperature, right? Understanding that natural light will vary from probably 1400 Kelvin, which is lower than candlelight, all the way to moonlight could be 10,000 Kelvin. Maybe the sun is somewhere between 1800 Kelvin and 5500 Kelvin, right? So being able to access those color temperatures is important. I think intensity is another one, right? Because throughout the course of the day, natural light changes intensity. This is more of a design element than a technological element, but the position of that light relative to the human body is also very important, because it starts at the horizon, low levels in the morning, rises up. By noon, it's at the height, it's illuminating from the top, and then back at night, it comes below the horizon. So when you go to bars or restaurants, the ones that are most successful in creating ambiances really have that subtle glow, oftentimes that horizon line emanating from behind the banquette. And so, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think to think about all those different tools that you have at your disposal, and when designing, apply them conscientiously to recreate those moods and atmospheres as you would have in nature.
That's a very good point. I think there's a tie-in to both, because there's also daylight, right? When you have good, seamless indoor-outdoor spaces, we get more access to natural daylight, which has a tremendous impact on human health as well. A lot of the doctors these days say the first thing you should do after you get up, drink water, go outside and get natural daylight, because that sets your circadian clock for the rest of the day, and your sleep actually improves. So those are very interesting points. I was actually at your experience center last week, and the sensory aspects of light are just tremendous. And another thing that I didn't realize was so impactful is the light's impact on artwork, the way that it just drew out different elements of the artwork. I can't even explain it technically.
Yeah, and I think that's another point too, is when we think about sunlight, it's full spectrum, right? It has different wavelengths of light, red, green, blue, all of it. You see it reflected or refracted through a prism. As we begin to recreate natural light indoors, to have light fixture sources, LED sources, that have that full spectrum of light is super important. And this gets a little bit technical, but to really have red, green, blue, white, to mix the white light makes it more similar to that of the natural sun versus an LED source that's just a single chip of white light that might just be 3,000 Kelvin, or a single chip of white light that might be 3,000 mixing with a 2,000, because then you're missing that kind of depth of spectrum that you would have with a full spectrum light source like the sun.
Any other things that you guys are doing?
So I'm especially concerned about continuous monitoring and reduction of volatile organic compounds and other environmental.
Did you get that?
I couldn't.
VOCs.
VOCs. Yeah, one of the biggest things is to stop contaminants or toxins from forming at the source. That's like one of the number one things, and I think you have a few good sources in terms of clean materials like Greenguard.
Yeah, I think, for general sourcing of materials, low VOC helps detoxify, right? It helps make a healthier environment generally. And as you start choosing different manufacturers' products, you can look for things like Greenguard certification or cradle to cradle, or again, the EPDs that I mentioned beforehand, which state the ingredients of a product. And then you can match those or kind of compare those to different manufacturers and make an educated decision. But I think our industry as a whole is beginning now to recognize that we have to talk about these things and we have to make them visible to the consumer. In the commercial world, you think about some of the big firms like the HOKs of the world, they all have commitments to green and sustainable building, where they have like stats of every single material that they specify has to have an EPD. 60% or more have to be 100% recycled content. And so we're seeing that happen a lot in the commercial world. I think it's beginning to infiltrate the residential world, but that also begins to talk about the opportunity that we have here, and also the opportunity for you all to then kind of differentiate your practices and bring value to your clients accordingly.
I did want to point out that as much as we limit the installation or deployment of these types of clean products, we ourselves are polluters. Like what we breathe, what we perspire, what we bring in from the outside. So along with these sound practices, it's also important to address the 3 pillars of air quality, which are filtration. We want to reduce the particulate load in the home, and technology is such that you can actually create an ISO level clean room in your home. So people with allergies, asthma, they get relief when you come home. The second pillar is ventilation. If you do have any pollutants that do come into the breathing space, when you have an ERV or outdoor air that's filtered, you're actually diluting that toxic load, reducing it, right? Because you're exchanging it with non-toxic air. And then the last pillar of air quality is humidity control. You really want to get it around 50%, which is optimal for human health. You'll get less sick. Your mucous membranes will do their jobs better. So those are all within the realm of possibility with technology that is available today. And we can go on and on. There's neuroaesthetics, biophilic design. There's so many aspects. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of time. So I did want to share a bit of market forecast and data. So how many of you guys have heard of the Global Wellness Institute? Put your hand up. Okay, some of you. So they are pretty much, they have the pulse of the global wellness market globally. There's 11 sectors. There's like spa or hydrothermal, there's like nutrition, but there's something called wellness real estate. That's kind of falls under our domain here. Buildings, homes, neighborhoods, and communities that are proactively designed and built to support the holistic health of their residents, occupants, and visitors. That's the definition of wellness real estate. The growth has been, 2020 was 250 billion. Last year was like 437 billion. And then the forecast for 2028 is 912 billion. It's the fastest growing sector amongst all wellness sectors. So the reason why I wanted to share this is there's a huge opportunity for our community to make impact on communities, people, and households, right? So the question is, how do we do that? A lot of people are like, everyone's doing their own thing, but how do we do that? So we want to delve into a bit of that topic.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to hear those statistics because I think well-being and sustainability go hand in hand, and you're hearing that in this dialogue. And, you know, all of a sudden, you know, sustainability and well-being are a luxury, right? And they're being embraced by either it's literally luxury good companies or people working in the luxury design space as something that we're bringing to our clients as a value add. I like to give the example of Loro Piana. Does anyone know that brand? Raise of hands if you're familiar with it. I see some ladies, great. So Loro Piana is an Italian brand owned by LVMH Group that owns Louis Vuitton and Dior perfumes. And they specialize in beautiful fabrics made out of alpaca wool. And alpaca is this, you know, gorgeous animal in the Andes, you know, partially camel-looking, partially giraffe, very elegant. And what the company realized is that to be able to provide, you know, this fabric, this beautiful product to their consumers, they had to protect the species which was endangered. And so they had to partner with the Peruvian government to buy off land that they could then raise and protect these alpaca to then create this product. And I think that goes to show how now in today's world, you know, the luxury goods, the luxury services really need to pay attention to all of that. It's the environment, it's the sustainability, but it's also the social impact. And we'll delve a little bit deeper into that, but I think it's just a good example in a parallel industry that also can help us think about how we do that in ours as well.
Yeah, the global number that I shared with you, it's actually 28 CAGR, which is compounded annual growth rate, 28%, around 25% for wellness real estate. Just to put that into perspective, the fastest growing economies in the world are at 7%. So it's like 3 to 4 times faster than like what the fastest growing economies, India, Vietnam are. So there's tremendous opportunity at our, you know, right next to our feet. But what we're seeing in the industry is architect, first of all, has to be interested in it. Then is the designer interested in it? Then is the technology integrator or lifestyle integrator interested in it? How do we put everyone together so every project is addressing the health and wellness needs of people? So these are things to ponder.
And I think it's also bolstered by consumer interest as well, right? So a lot of the natural events happening in this world, whether it's forest fires or climate change or whatever we believe in, I think the consumers are noticing it. There was a really interesting article, I think it's the Wall Street Journal last week, about the rise in cases of lung cancer from non-smokers. And with Taiwan being one of the highest rates in the world due to pollution, right? So people are taking interest in it, there's an awareness of it, and now everyone's looking for ways that they can contribute, find solutions, and design responsibly as a result.
Yeah, I was, how many of you are from Southern California, LA? Anybody? Okay, we have some. So in Manhattan Beach, there's a new wellness center that was set up by John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. It's right in Manhattan Beach. It's called Love Life. The website is love.life. I went there and I visited them, and it was really interesting to see because they handle everything from integrative medicine, like doctors. They have a fitness area, state of the art. They have things like amenities like cold plunge, infrared, hyperbaric oxygen. They have organic cafe. So they're touching on all these holistic elements of health, right? I went to Well, New York City last week, very similar concept. But in the home, if you think about the home, how do we put everything together? Right now it's just hodgepodge. Everyone's doing their separate thing. But when I saw these two places, the thing that I had in my mind is if we can get the architectural community, the design community, the technology community, all working together, then it's actually going to be even more appealing for people. Because when they talk to the architect, designer, lifestyle integrator, everyone's saying the same language, and they have access to whatever they feel like is most important to them. So it's just something that I was thinking of visiting these places.
Yeah, and I think the point being that everyone needs to work together from the start, right? It starts with, if you're building a home from scratch, even just the positioning of the house on the site relative to the sun patterns, that's your first step in, making a sustainable, responsible space that's of well-being. The role of interior designer in choosing the materials that we talked about, or even, how you order the samples of those materials, because the sampling process is a really wasteful process as well. So there's places out there like Material Bank. Show of hands of who knows Material Bank. It's owned by Sandow Companies that has Interior Design Magazine, Metropolis, Lux Magazine, so all those industry publications. But it's a giant warehouse of materials where interior designers and architects can order their samples, delivered in 24 hours, arrive in a nice little box, and when you're done with it, you ship it back free of cost. So they don't stack up in your material library and you end up just pitching them. And so I think manufacturers who also want to sample responsibly are partnering with places like that because that's important to the whole design process and designing responsibly.
When we were talking, you mentioned SD, DD, and CD. Can you kind of explain that and why it's relevant with our audience?
Sure. This is probably going to be old news for the designers in the world, but for integrators and manufacturing reps and people from a different side of things, in the design process, you start with schematic design, which is the initial design, ideas, conceptual renderings, first floor plans of laying out program relative to one or the other. You move on to design development, where it's the detail drawings, the section cuts, all of that. And ultimately, rendering that all into construction documents which get built by the contractor in the final stage of construction administration. When we talked about the integration community and how we can all work better together with architects and interior designers, it's so important to get in at the very start. And I know for some designers in the room, they might say, wait, I'm not ready to talk technology at the very start when I'm just conceptualizing color schemes and big picture concepts. But the reality is that if one of your big picture concepts is well-being, then the conversation of technology needs to happen at that point. And technology isn't, what you're presenting to the client. It's the means by which you accomplish what you want to accomplish. I always give an example, and I think a lot of well-being is also about intuition and making things easy, as I mentioned beforehand, free of friction. And myself working in the lighting world, you might speak to a client and say, do you want a lighting control system? And they go, no. And then you might say, do you want an all-off button so that when you leave the house, everything turns off? And they go, absolutely, right? So that's two different ways of talking about the same thing. One is the value that you bring to the client. The other is the technology that goes into the project. I think technology should be an unseen luxury, right? Those behind the scenes should see it, but the end user should just feel that ease that brings well-being into their life. And so to have those conversations early on at the schematic design phase is important.
Yeah. One of the things notorious with the technology integrators are they're always towards the back end of that, right? And by then, what happens is, because the discussion wasn't up front, there's a lot of things that don't get done that should get done, and then a lot of issues. So I think events like this, design community coming to CDA, is one way to try to bridge that gap. I know Josh from HCA is here. He's working hard always to create those collaborative opportunities and elevate the value of what technology integrators. I like to say technology and lifestyle integrators, because that's really what the CDA channel is all about. And I was in a session this morning, and integrators or lifestyle technology integrators who've been in the industry 20, 30 years, they've been saying that AV is going a little down, but motorized shades, lighting has gone up tremendously. And especially the early pioneers, when they go to clients and say, do you want clean air? Is it important to you, clean water? they hardly get any no's. It's like an easy conversation, but it's a difficult one when you feel like you don't have the expertise. But the message was, don't be scared. Start somewhere and get out there and start talking about how important the environment is for health. And that goes towards designers and architects as well. And one piece of advice that I usually give, or I hear other people give, if you're interested in health and wellness and incorporating it as a fabric of what you offer, then get someone on your team. It could either be yourself to get like a WELL AP certification or a FitWell certification, because you start to understand the holistic attributes of what constitutes a space. And when you get those certifications, that's where you're legitimate then, right? You're not just talking about it. You're actually a professional expert. You did the hard work, you got the certification, and you're qualified to talk about it. But even before then, you can get people talking, you can start the conversation, and people will be interested.
Yeah, and we're privileged to have Michael on the stage because he's WELL AP certified and also a faculty of it. And so can you help break down a little bit what WELL certification entails, the different categories that people design towards, and how people might go about educating themselves on that?
So WELL is the largest health and wellness certification body. FitWell is number 2. They've been around for 10 and 8 years respectively. But in terms of WELL, it's 10 concepts that constitute a space. Air, water, light are the 3 core, but then you have things like materials, mind, which is like biophilic design. Then you have nourishment, which is nutrition. And then you have movement. That's why outdoor, indoor space is important. We want to get people moving. And you have some other ones. You have 2 or 3 other ones. But there are prerequisites, and if you get a certain score, you can get WELL certified. And since COVID, up until now, 5 billion square feet, it's actually approaching 6 billion square feet around the world have been certified WELL. All the top Fortune 500 companies have gotten it because they want people to come back to the workplace. They want to say, we did what we need to create a workplace for you. But now, because of the trends that I showed you earlier, WELL is now offering a residential certification. So developers are jumping on the bandwagon. In 30 countries, developers are piloting the WELL residential certification. And US is the biggest market for it, 55%. So there's an opportunity for you to start getting into more health and wellness focused projects.
Yeah, I think it also, it's interesting because we went and did our WELL certification for our New York Experience Center. And there's some obvious things like access to natural light, which we specialize in and was easy for us to embrace and implement. It challenged us in other ways, right? From choice of materials and plasters and wood to having nutritious snacks in the kitchen for our employees. But what I wanted to kind of say is that through working with that kind of parameters and framework, it also drives creativity and innovation. For example, biophilia, the obvious choice was put plants in the space. That's easy. But then we also began to think about how can light delight in different ways. And so we created this chandelier, it'll probably come up in one of these images, of a dappled light fixture that creates kind of this movement of foliage patterns on the floor, right? And so it's these kind of moments of unexpected design creativity that can emerge when you're designing towards well-being or designing with the WELL standard in mind that are really magical, right? And so to use that as an opportunity to also kind of push your creative practice because it can do that. We've seen it for ourselves.
And because there is a clear demand for these types of features in a home, these builders and developers are jumping at the opportunity to pilot it because they want to see that clear return on investment. It's going to cost a little more to implement and deploy these wellness features and solutions, but on the back end, they're going to get the ROI off of it. And the studies are showing that there's a net positive ROI on this, and it's a way to differentiate against the other developer in the same town. And so what I want to get kind of push forward to you guys is it's the exact same thing. if you're known as the designer or the architect that creates the healthiest indoor environments, that is a clear differentiator in your marketplace.
So Michael's the expert in air and water on the stage. For those two categories, what are the top 5 things that you'd recommend people pay attention to or design towards as they approach their projects?
So I actually kind of talked about air a bit, the 3 pillars, but more than ever before, asthma rates, allergy. Who has heavy allergies here? Yeah, this year was really bad, especially in New York. I traveled most of the summer throughout California, up the West Coast, through the Rockies. I was even in Asia, and I was suffering because usually when I'm home, I have that clean room and air environment. So no matter how bad the pollen is outside, when I go inside, within 10 minutes, I'm relieved. I never take antihistamines. Like my home is like my safe haven, right? But when I'm outside of the home, I'm just suffering a lot. So that's the rates are as high as ever. That's the number one question you can ask your clients. Is there anyone in your family is suffering from asthma or allergies? Wildfire zones. California, not so much this year, but Colorado, I know, had huge wildfires. It's only going to become more and more prevalent. How great is it if you have relief from it, right? When you're home, you can invite people, you can invite your elderly parents when things like that happen. So air quality in that sense is extremely, extremely vital. It's going to become more. Water quality, we are seeing a much faster uptick than air quality. It's because a lot more people are realizing that there's no such thing as clean tap water. It's filled with PFAS, forever chemicals,
You're
microplastics.
terrifying me.
No, I don't mean this to, people always say, oh, you're trying to scare us.
I tell everyone that New York City tap water is the best in the world.
It is. Comparatively, New York City is better than most places, but it still has contaminants that we should not be ingesting. But the great thing is we have the tools and the technology to get rid of all of it. And it's connected. You could actually see the water quality right on your phone. So those are things as technology integrators, working with them, you can deploy them in your projects and you can actually give that ultimate peace of mind to your clients, because anyone, HVAC plumbing, can say they sell the best air and water quality, but there's no way of knowing if it's actually working. But through the latest technology advancements, you can actually see the exact real-time air and water quality. That's the differentiator that the CEDIA channel has, above the typical trades.
Yeah. If I were to kind of summarize light into a few bullet points, I think the first one is natural light, which we talked about a lot, and it's a kind of simulation of sunlight within the home and that kind of dynamic changing. But to always remember that the shades are part of that story too, because ultimately they're a filter of sunlight. 2, I think the idea that light should be dynamic is an important one. And dynamic in even the smallest details of a keypad on the wall. If it's back glowing, does it dim down by night so it doesn't disturb your sleep patterns? Little details like that where it should change throughout the course of the day is super important. Intuitive, right? That sense of ease to design light and lighting with that is going to be beneficial. And I think there's always that concept of creating moods and ambiances. And oftentimes when it's right, you don't necessarily notice it, but it just feels good. You only notice it when it's not right. So it doesn't need to necessarily call attention to itself, but it needs to make you feel at home and at ease. And as we begin to kind of wrap this up, I just want to share one lighting story example that I think is pretty profound that I experienced. So there's a luxury senior housing group, let's say, called Coterie, and they have a facility or apartments in New York City. They have in San Francisco. I think they're now building in Boston. And we had the opportunity to put in dynamic Ketra lighting in that New York space. And it was implemented in the memory care unit floor as well. And so I had the opportunity to walk that floor with the head nurse, who is not an architect, not a designer, knows nothing about light. And as I'm taking the tour, I'm asking her all sorts of questions about, textural materiality, because going back to engaging the senses and neuroaesthetics, the idea of having things that you can touch and feel to engage the senses is important for memory care units. And I asked her generally, how's your lighting working for you? And she paused and she looked at me and she goes, what's interesting is that people don't really ask me what time of day it is anymore. And I paused and I thought, wow, that's a really profound statement. Because for people who have, memory care challenges, to feel secure in the time of day and their place on earth while being indoors, is something that's really something to be celebrated, right? And to think that light and electric light in the world that we work in can do that for people, that's something that's exciting, and that we can all keep iterating on and improving upon. So that's my closing words on light before we open it up for questions. Any closing words on air and water?
Yeah, I wanted to, some of you probably have heard of the 3 Ps, like purpose and mission-driven companies usually exist more than just to make money, right? So the 3 Ps were people, planet, profit, but now we're seeing wellness center organizations moving towards the 5 Ps. So the 5 Ps are passion. So every one of you created a business or a part of a business because you have a passion for something, right? It's the reason why you created it. And then the second P is purpose. So what is the mission of that company? All the strategy, who you talk to, how you operate the business is based on the mission of that company, right? Through that lens. Then there's people. It's not just you, it's your staff, it's the clients you serve, but it's the communities that you touch. And then there's planet. We talked about the importance of decarbonization, being mindful of protecting our environment because we're leaving it for the next generation. And then the last P is prosperity. There is that financial component of it, because if you do bring value to people, you will get that financial return, but it's more than that. It's actually giving a return to our communities, socially, our planet, and the people that we touch. So the 5 Ps is really, really important. And I think what we're talking about here as a community is those 5 Ps are so important. If we focus on those things and we come together, then we can really amplify the type of impact through the work that we're all doing with a lens of health and well-being and serving people so that they can live longer, healthier, be with their families, less chronic illnesses, and they will always remember you because you brought this to them and you brought it to their families. So I really hope, I love this event. I'm so happy to be back again. I would love to connect with, especially the people in New York, but I travel. You travel a lot. I travel 50% already this year. I'm all over the country. So I'd love to connect with all of you. And Cecilia is a road warrior too. So we would love to connect with you wherever you guys are. Also whenever you guys come to New York. So that's kind of my parting words.
So any questions? Yeah.
We have a question?
Okay. First of all, thank you both for coming and sharing your knowledge. This is really, really good for me, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room. You both used a term earlier, which is awesome to hear you use, circadian rhythm. I know a lot of us 3-4 years ago started hearing some made-up terms like human-centric lighting and different things, because big companies, especially like Lutron or Crestron, were afraid to use the term human-centric, or circadian rhythm. So I guess my question to you guys is, especially you, Cecilia, is there things that we can use that are hard data or scientifically proven yet? You mentioned, Green Garden certification, you mentioned Global Wellness Institute, those are a couple of things. And you even mentioned the Lutron Experience Center in New York being well certified. That's good stuff to be able to tell homeowners and obviously designers on the working with. So I guess my question is there anything that Lutron has put forward that you can share videos, collaterals, or will there be in the future that literally reference the benefits of circadian rhythm lighting and how Lutron products and services can elevate that?
Yeah, I would probably point you to partners with whom we collaborate, whether it's architecture firms or associations who've implemented our solutions and have their case studies as third-party case studies. I think those are always more powerful. One that comes to mind that's awesome is ASID's national headquarters in Washington, D.C., where they implemented lighting that changes throughout the course of the day, had a very strong focus on, I think they got WELL certification as well. So that one's a great one that's published online. I think I can let the cat out of the bag because it's already under construction, but AIA is rebuilding their headquarters in Washington, D.C. to open next year. We've been doing a lot of work with them, partnering with them on that. And so I'm sure there'll be case studies that come out of that as well. So I would say, those are two starting points. And then, of course, some of the firms I mentioned, like HOK, if you go on their website, have just a plethora of really great stuff that speaks to that.
I recommend the International Well Building Institute. They have a lot on light. Also the Mayo Clinic, that's what they do. They study the built environment, the impact of light, air, water, and other aspects on human health. So Mayo Clinic is great, Cleveland Clinic is great. Those are all great scientific research body resources that you can tap into. I've personally curated the latest news on air and water for the last over 5 years. If you're interested, I think there's going to be a link to those resources. You can track the evolution of water quality and air quality, and it's not it's not trying to scare people. It's just showing the reality through scientific research.
Other questions out there?
Any more questions? Going once, twice. Come on, raise your hands. All right, we're round of applause. Thank you.